Welcome to the Small Business Big Insights podcast. So excited today to share this episode with some big insights from two special guests. So we have David Perry and Paul LaBarge, who are going to share with us some great insights about some advocacy work that they're working on about extending some flow-through shares to small business owners. And there's some powerful tax incentives in there, and we're going to talk all about it. So I invite everybody now to subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already. Otherwise, you're going to miss some of the upcoming episodes. And also, obviously, leave us a nice review. It helps us spread the message. So today we've got the two special guests, David and Paul. I'm not going to go through their full bios. You guys can read that through the show notes, but I will say that these are two serious heavy hitters. And so David runs a successful C-suite recruiting firm in Canada with over 30 years of experience, and Paul runs a highly regarded law firm that helps a lot of organizations in Canada, including a lot of tech startups and technology companies. So very knowledgeable people here to talk to us about their program and their advocacy work. So let's get straight into it. So I wanted to have both of you on the show because I think the policy that you're proposing to the government moving forward would be super interesting to business owners, right? So some people know about flow-through shares when it comes to like mining and exploration, but you two have some interesting ideas that I think is worth exploring. And there's some serious momentum right now around this movement and a real chance that this actually gets enacted. So what exactly are you trying to accomplish here?
Sovereignty and wealth creation for Canadians. Isn't that what it's all about? Really?
More or less, although I would probably add to that
Of course you would.
the Canadianization of our companies. We're tired of exporting in offices to the U.S. and other places, and we want Canadians to actually participate. Canadians generally, not just a few entrepreneurs, to participate in the success of what our universities and our entrepreneurs have created from a platform in Canada.
Yeah. And Canada does have a good startup community, but what sometimes happens is they leave Canada or they decide, you know what, once things kind of hit the ground, they might move over, right? And so we want to keep that in Canada. That's basically what you're trying to do here. I know maybe kind of explain exactly what this whole flow through shares is, just right from the beginning. Let's get into it here. What are we talking about?
So the simplest way to explain it is if you look way down the road, backwards, and you look at what they've done in the mining sector. And in the mining sector, what they were doing is taking special credits and able to flow them, and rather than taking the deductions in a company that was already losing money, to take those deductions and monetize them by flowing out the deduction to people who purchase shares in the company.
Right.
So that model worked very well in terms of recognizing that, mining projects take years. Right? And they eat up a lot of capital in the early stages. And so what they did is they take all of those expenditures, pass them back to the investors. The investors write down the value of their shares so that they essentially are taking some of their investment dollars out of their profits or income for the year. So rather than taking $50,000 out of your savings and putting it into this venture, which is a very risky venture, what you're effectively doing with the deduction is you're writing the check and getting the deduction as if you lost it all today. So that really is a simple way to explain it. The reality is that if you then sell it subsequently and you recover that investment dollar, you're going to get taxed.
Yeah, this is a taxable thing.
Right? So it's not like it disappears. It's not paper. But at the same time, if it goes belly up, then at that point in time, the deduction has already been taken.
Right.
So you realize it's your classic investment scenario. Write the check, pick it up, and kiss it because you may never see it again.
Yeah.
That's effectively what the FTS does. But it was restricted. It was restricted to mining and oil and gas.
Right.
And there have been sort of limitations imposed over the years.
Right.
Because some people didn't like it because they said, these rich people are profiting from this.
Right.
But the reality is that a number of those stocks were being traded on the mining exchange, which is penny stock, which means anybody could play.
Right. Okay.
So our position was, well, why would you limit this to just extraction, mineral extraction? Because the reality is big software projects, big IP projects, new technologies take years. Okay? So why should it be any different for this segment than that segment? Because we're trying to create a robust economy, not a series of sort of pinnacles that are sticking up like islands in the stream. We actually want the whole economy to grow. And the reality is, and I think this is the other thing, you get to it later on in the discussion, but the reality is that there's not that much leakage. Interestingly enough, we can get to that later.
The leakage and lost money or lost time.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. And I'm sure this is a little bit more technical than maybe most people listening can maybe take in. So what I'm going to promise everyone here is I'm going to take it in. I'm an accountant. I can hopefully understand what the two of them here are talking about, and I'll give them a thumbs up or a thumbs down by the end of the episode. So stay tuned. So basically, are you suggesting that certain industries would be benefiting from this? Is it just the tech companies, or is it small business owners? Is it only high growth companies? Like, how do you distinguish?
So I'm a great believer in trying to focus on the art of the possible.
Okay.
So if we start with the fact that everybody loves technology these days, well, let's go get a yes on technology. And then when we see it work, let's go get a yes on the rest of the economy.
Okay.
Because if you stop and think about it, the high-tech sectors are concentrated in certain cities in Canada.
In Canada. Yeah.
You don't see a lot of them in Moose Jaw. And you don't see a lot of them, up in northern Alberta. You might see some, but not a lot. But the truth of the matter is that if you said this plan could apply to startup expenses that are realized by any company that fits into the definition that exists in the Act of qualified small businesses, so Canadian-controlled private corporations. If you started to apply it more broadly, you could actually start to create employment in different areas and different sectors all the way across Canada. I mean, from a development of Canada perspective, do you care if they're making and selling furniture, or if they're making and selling software or other inventions? Realistically speaking, from an economic point of view, you're creating employment. You're giving people the ability to afford a house. You're giving them the ability to stay in their community. So those, at the moment, I'm going, let's focus on technology because it's easier for people to understand because it's very similar to, in profile, to mining or oil and gas, right? So people go, okay, I get that. I understand it. Whereas if we start talking about qualified small businesses and, involved in farms, people are going to say, this is too much. This is going to bankrupt us. We can't do it. So let's start with the art of the possible.
It's not only the art of the possible because of what Paul's just said, but it's also technology now accounts for 9% of GDP in Canada.
Is it? Oh, yeah. Okay.
Mining, just slightly more than that.
Oh, okay.
So it's like $156 billion a year in GDP.
Yeah.
Mining has 400,000 people that work in mining. Tech, 1.8 million.
Oh, yeah.
So we're so close that just by changing pieces of the policy, we can really leapfrog this business and really max it up.
Well, and I think, one of the reasons we're looking at this is it reduces the vulnerability of Canadian startups to losing the technology to foreign investors.
So is that why you guys are doing this?
Part of it. Yeah.
Just so that you don't lose out to foreign,
So think of it this way. Years ago, as you know, I got involved in building the Trans-Canada Trail.
Yeah.
People said, why? And I said, because I believe in Canada.
Yeah.
Okay. I want us to have a way to come together. Okay. This is really just a continuation of that. I believe in Canada. I think personally, we're under threat. And the best way to counter that threat is to make sure that we're strong enough to stand on our own and we don't have to give up anything to anybody.
And doing FTS for tech allows us to do that fast.
The truth is too that most people that are investing in a business, if they're going to be buying shares in a company as an investment, oftentimes it will be a tech company. Right? So that's where it would be most useful. Sure, there's people who have a holding go and they own a barbershop or whatever, but it sounds like a lot of the people that would be investing are investing in tech companies anyway, right?
Imagine if you were talking about a farm equipment company. Like, what if it was starting Massey Ferguson again today?
Right.
Right? Like, why would that be any different in terms of what you're trying to achieve?
But keep it focused. Keep it focused on tech, allows the politicians to understand it very clearly. And there's a lot of noise going on right now.
Yeah.
Understand very clearly, and we can keep them focused on that. And as that starts to grow and prove itself, they can do whatever they want to do.
Yeah. So what kind of progress have you had in the last little bit? Because I had seen some articles come out. I think you had an OBJ op-ed. There was all kinds of stuff I was reading up about, right? So what's kind of happened since you kind of started doing this, and where are you at now?
Go ahead.
It started over a breakfast in the first couple of days of December. I met with Paul to say this is something we should do and the following reasons. And Paul beat me over the head and shoulders for about 3 or 4 hours just to make sure I was doing it for the right reasons, and convinced he was. We did, okay, we're going to do this. And then I started a website, and then I went out and recruited Paul Brent, the CPD anchor. And we started to write letters, and we approached all the political parties because I wrote a letter to Trudeau and I sent it to him the 5th of December. He gaffed on the 19th, and all of a sudden we're into this election. And so I went after all of the political parties to say, hey, this is something we can do. And it helps us fight tariffs, and it builds the country. This is a nation-building activity. And everyone but the Liberals ignored us. And so by the middle of April, about a week before the actual election, the Liberals put it in their a plank in their platform. Then they got elected. Now they got elected. And now we have to help them craft that policy and push it through. So we went from 0 to 60 in 90 days.
Well, yeah, and I think the other benefit is that with the change in the leadership of the Liberal Party, this initiative would not have survived the prior regime.
Yeah, right. There needs to be change, and they're looking for new ideas, something fresh.
You've got a guy who is currently the prime minister who actually understands economics,
right?
Understands investment, has to understand taxation. Right? He's got the tools to look at this, and he's surrounded by people who've got those tools, where it's not, the initiatives are not things they're not sound bites. They're actually solid pieces that you can use to build something. And his focus, he knows it's the best way to repel borders is to have a wall. And that wall has to be our economy. That's why he's doing the major projects. And again, if you think about it, for some of these massive projects, how many startup businesses are there going to be? And what if the people who can supply those services could have access to FTS?
And we know he understands this because I went and read all of his speeches, all of Prime Minister Carney's speeches when he was the governor of the Bank of England. And it was clear that he was talking about this, and he understood this as much as 10 years ago. So it just became a natural thing to start discussing in his terms, so that he can get it and doesn't have to educate everybody else. They can get it as well.
Interesting. The underlying premise here is that you want to make sure that we're investing in the Canadian businesses, especially in the tech community, and then getting that to stay in Canada, to not leave the country, right? And so isn't there still a chance that intellectual property does get sold to the U.S.? And
There's always that risk.
So we're not protecting it like we are with Shred, right?
Put it this way, if a large bulk of your shareholders are Canadian, your ability to sell it out from underneath them goes way down. Okay, because you got to get shareholder approval.
Because if you get the investors like from angel to kind of seed, and then eventually they're not going to want to move.
Well, exactly. And if they're Canadians, and you're probably going to have some of the people actually in the business who previously were putting in their own money anyways.
Right.
And now they're going to do it because they can put in more by doing it this way.
Because it essentially changes the ROI formula to reduce the risk, right? Because you're claiming those tax benefits early.
Well,
you get that benefit.
It reduces the risk. It just makes it real day one. and allows you to manage your cash flow.
Real as in most cases, you lose money on these investments.
I mean, God knows, and to prove that.
Yeah, that's true. And so I guess how significant could this actually be here, right? Like you guys are talking about this as an idea. Like what?
Oh, it's significant.
Like how many billions of dollars or millions of dollars is this going to cost the government?
So do you want me to talk about first year or in Canada, or do you want me to talk about the first 5 years when Britain did this? Let me start with Canada.
Sure.
Because that's the numbers you want. So I used the actual model out of the Prospectors Association.
Okay.
So first year, we'll probably raise about 500 million Canadian.
Raise in investments?
Private capital into using FTS.
Okay.
That 500 million, by the time you bought equipment, bought office space, all this kind of stuff, turns out to be about 1.2 billion money. And the government, how much do they get? Well, by the time you finish paying payroll tax, HST, QPP, everything, out of that, they're getting $375 million in tax back. So it may take them a year or two, but they're going to get it all back. And this has been proven out in the UK. You know, that's what I sent you this morning.
Okay.
You know, when the UK started this, they started the seed investment. It's called SEIS and EIS, two different funds. The first one they started in 94 and ran it for 5 years until 99. It's still running today. They raised 97 million pounds the first year. This is from a standing start in 1994 when nobody understood this. We invented FTS. We invented the whole scheme. So in Canada, we get it a little faster. What's really interesting.
Well, we already have provinces that are doing it.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, for the traditional mining FTS?
No. Just an investor credit.
Oh, okay.
That can be used.
Right.
BC?
Yep.
Nova Scotia?
Yep.
New Brunswick?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. You know, so I mean, and they've raised significant money. And, you know, I mean, I guess if you want to go back to one of your earlier questions, why are we doing this? And this is not a recent idea.
Yeah.
Okay.
This has been done before.
Well, it's not just that. It comes back. It has its origins in an organization called the Canadian Advanced Technology Alliance.
Okay.
With John Reed. Okay. And John was the constant voice in the desert. He was John the Baptist for technology in Canada. And John and I and the National Angel Organization all were working on trying to encourage the government to adopt this plan 30 years ago to John. And so when you ask us why we're doing it, part of it is an homage.
Interesting. Yeah.
He was a visionary in terms of advancing, got a lot accomplished in supporting and creating a lot of nascent technology companies. And this one was very much a goal to be achieved. And unfortunately, he died. And we just thought, it's time. It's a recognition of the right thing to do, which John was always a big believer in. Very Canadian, which John was a big believer in, and very much a smart way to do it that is not injurious to the economy. It actually is supportive and triggers growth.
So you're saying that it's not going to cost the government much money or any money doing this, right? Like the premise that you explained.
It's a timing difference.
It was just that, like, sure, it's going to be basically some tax savings ahead of time or less tax revenue that the government's going to receive, but that'll allow for employment and there's going to be additional income tax withheld and all that kind of stuff that basically just goes back to the government and it's going to break itself even. Is that?
Well, what happens is so I'd have to be a better mathematician than I am, but effectively what happens is it gives you day one, it gives you the write down of your investment. So that's where the money comes from.
Yeah.
And it takes your cost base down to zero. Okay? So let's say you put in $50,000, you get assigned $50,000 in credits. It'll take your cost base down to zero. Okay?
Yeah.
But if the company succeeds, all of that gain from zero to the original $50,000 is
I understand
which you won before, right? In addition, what comes back right away to compensate for that 50% of that amount that got taken out of revenues of the Crown, you've got salaries, okay, that go to people who are employed in these industries. You've got items that they purchase from suppliers. You've got HST on those, okay? You've got CPP, you've got UI, you've got all the other taxes that the government collects along the way. And basically what David was saying is that you're looking at probably 80% of that original amount being recovered. Over the period of the spending of the money. Yeah. And then at the end of the day, if the company's a success, you get it all back. And so there's your timing difference.
So you're suggesting that, like, you're writing down the investment once you've kind of put the money in. But from what I understand, and obviously, like, correct me, but I think, isn't the idea that people put their money in and then they get their deductions based on the losses of the startup, right? So
I can tell you the speed with which people incur losses. Yeah. Effectively, you're talking 1 to 2 years.
Yeah. Okay. Because, like, in essence, right now, a lot of those startups have losses that will never get claimed. So, right.
So the reality is, as a tax lawyer, I'm probably working against myself with this model, but the reality is, I can do the same thing by using a limited partnership.
Right.
I can.
In Canada, you can't flow out. In Canada, it's a lot harder to flow out those losses. In the U.S., you can
much.
Yeah, I guess you need the right structure to do that, but they don't want to encourage it in Canada anyway.
And I guess the other thing too is when you stop to think about it, the government has certainly for the last 25, 30 years had a preference for believing, the public servants have had a preference for believing that they're a better judge of an investment than you are. Yeah. So, for instance, the superclusters.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, the superclusters, I have large reservations about it because my observation has been that they gave the money to a big company, which then sucked up the technology of smaller companies and incorporated
all the small ones.
So it's basically, so you're giving money to the guy who's the head of the gang to take it from all the other people, take their technology. Yeah. Well, that doesn't strike me as a very democratic kind of approach. Yeah. And not all of the superclusters were, shall we say, outstanding successes. And I look at it from the perspective that if people are invested in their businesses, if Canadians are invested in businesses, that's different than it going to the big guys. Because from an administration point of view, financial administration point of view, give me as few people as possible so my audit functions easier. And I'm going, it's not, and generally speaking, government employees are trained to review, delay, audit, question, etc. Yeah. And have a decision time frame that is not measured. It's measured against political goals more often than not, as opposed to financial performance. Right. And this way, the fittest shall get to the end point faster because it's about market knowledge. It's about sales ability. It's about performance ability. Mostly things that government aren't qualified to assess.
Interesting. Okay. And then,
so good on macro, crap on micro.
So I understand, I guess, what you're saying here with, like, basically it should kind of break itself even with, like, basically the economic activity that it does generate and the losses that are being claimed are from the actual operating losses. But essentially you're suggesting that through partnerships, you'd still have that benefit anyway. Why go through this whole complicated new process when a lot of the tech companies are already claiming SR&ED, right? So why not just make SR&ED refundable? And then
for some companies they are.
But making it for everyone, that would simplify, instead of adding this whole other,
There's only one problem with that.
Yeah.
I've made a lot of money in the tech space as a lawyer providing services. One of the services I've had to provide is fighting with Revenue Canada over what's a qualified expenditure.
Yes.
And if you spent any time dealing with the accounting relating to SR&ED,
absolutely,
you know, and I know that. So I was doing a speech one time with Russ Roberts, who was the head of the CRA scientific research program.
Okay.
And he brought in a report about what was qualifying expenditures. And I started my speech by saying, well, we're all familiar with the 3 greatest lies. The first one is, I love you and I'll still respect you in the morning. The second one is, your check's in the mail. And the third one is, hi, I'm with the CRA. I'm here to make sure you get all your deductions. The room was amused, but Russ wasn't. But it's that element of the more bureaucracy you apply to industry, the less productivity you get, the less performance you get. And so to have people, I mean, I've had to litigate what constitutes scientific research.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay?
It's not easy.
And I'll tell you the one thing for sure, the general view of the CRA to scientific research is a guy with a PhD, a lab coat, and a clipboard. Okay? The concept of some guy who's running a sawmill up in Sault Ste. Marie, who's figured out a remarkable way to use all the scrap to create a new form of lumber used for trusses. I spent 8 years litigating that case.
Yeah.
Okay? So that's why I have a reluctance to say, why don't we let the market deal with this?
Right.
Because the gross numbers are always going to be there.
Yeah.
And what is spent and the number of small companies who've had shred claims dismissed is legion. I mean, that's, listen.
Oh, I see it.
Accountants, I've made a bundle on it, and so lawyers, which is kind of the wrong indicator of effectiveness.
Yeah. No, so I guess what you're suggesting is that the criteria would be easier to understand under your I don't want to call it a scheme, under your structure for the flow through shares, so that there's less ambiguity or argument that could be had, and it's just easier for everyone.
And I think the reality is, a buck is a buck is a buck. If you've lost it on, pipettes, or you've lost it on a development program, and the salaries of those people, you've still lost it.
Yeah.
And so you get into, people are going to screw us on overhead costs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You can cover all of that in a normal audit. You don't have to make it a shred issue.
So you've kind of talked about how you've had this idea and you've been kind of talking about it and advocating it for years. Why is now the pinnacle moment for this to happen?
Well, what's that phrase? There's nothing like impending doom to focus the mind. Okay? And the reality is, we're under threat from our largest trading partner. Yeah. And if there's one thing, if you were going to use an analogy, which I'm fond of doing, it's like we've been skiing, and all of a sudden, we're at the bottom of the hill. And the reality is we've run out of speed because we've been doing the easy thing, going downhill. Now we have to go back up the hill, except the lift is broken and we got to walk up the hill, right? And so the reality is that if you look at where we are geopolitically, declining productivity in Canada, the threat from the U.S., climate change, all those sorts of things, it behooves us to become more self-reliant and to be owners of our own country.
Yeah. And we got lucky because Prime Minister Carney has been there, seen the success. Yeah. When we look at what they did with SEIS and EIS in Britain over the last, since we suggested 30 years ago and it went nowhere, the Brits did it, and they've seen 30 billion pounds of private capital raised. They've supported 53,000 companies. Okay. Wow. And they've created 400,000 jobs. Okay. So once again, it's been done. Someone else is capitalizing on it. And let's just drag it back and do it ourselves.
And we happen to be talking about a prime minister who's read the book.
Yep. Yeah.
Wore the shirt, saw the movie, chewed the gum. He's done all of that.
But I guess because I certainly understand that I do believe, I think there would be economic benefit from doing this. First of all, like a net, even if it breaks even, let's say, on all the salaries, you're creating extra companies. You're creating a lot of small, innovative companies that could grow. And so that does foster an economy. So I think there's huge benefits there. And I think the risk for Carney is around like approving something that people perceive as being benefiting the rich, right?
But that's the whole point. It's not. Because imagine one of the things with programs that I'd thought of years ago is to say, well, if let's say you've decided you're going to start a small business and you employ people who aren't your girlfriend, your son, etc. Okay, you employ a third person. All right. Sure. Well, one of the ideas I had, you've just taken them off of unemployment or given them a source of income. That means the government's going to get taxes on them. They're going to get, payroll taxes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what if we said to you, you know what, for every job you create, I'm going to increase your ability to contribute to your RRSP by X percent of whatever that person's salary is.
Right. Okay.
Because as a small business person, you don't have a person like your parliament. You don't have a health plan like any member of parliament.
Yep.
You don't have a pension like any government employee or their health plan. Okay. You don't have any of that stuff.
Yep.
You have to rely entirely upon what you save. And I watched them, quite frankly, totally intellectually dishonest argument about how small business is ripping off the public.
Oh, man.
And I'm going, but that's actually wrong, because if you were to do a quick back of the envelope calculation about how much money and how many taxes you have to pay to get the same pension as Agmeet Singh after 7 years, okay, you're talking about having to earn $16+ million to get the same pension value that he's got, and that's after you've paid taxes on all of it.
Yeah. I mean, we could, I think it's clear to everyone that the government elected officials have a great pension.
Yeah. And I think the point is that you need to look at this thing in a holistic fashion. Like, what does it mean for the strength in our communities? Like, I got to tell you, it's nice that we pay our public servants well to get good people. I did talk to somebody who was the president of Treasury Board, and I asked him about government pensions and so on, and he said, well, Paul, I have to tell you, we did it because we thought we'd get better people. And my question to him was, how's that working out for you so far? And he said, worst decision of my life.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and I mean, like you mentioned, with like most small business owners, first of all, are not wealthy. Like most small business owners, they're struggling on their coffee shop. They're struggling trying to manage their barber shop or whatever it is, their dance studios. But they do need those savings. They need, like, you can't even retire with $1 million. Like you need a good amount of money to actually earn for your retirement, right? So a lot of the real non-government employees here do need savings, and those savings can be invested in things like you're suggesting.
For the example, I'm a small business owner. I'm in a law firm, right?
Yeah.
I'm 75. I'm still working. Like, why? Partly because I love it, but the truth of the matter is, to reach anywhere near the same equivalence, I got to spend a lot of years at it.
And I kind of alluded to it earlier with the SR&ED and leaving the intellectual property in Canada, but I guess one argument against what you're suggesting, and one argument for SR&ED, I would say, is that if you're spending on SR&ED qualified expenses, then you're making sure that technology is in Canada at least for that year, right? But as soon as you could build technology and then just move, and then we lose that company. Whereas if it's SR&ED, every year of spending,
you can also deal with that. I mean, there's a ways to deal with that quite easily. One is you move. It's a deemed disposition of all the assets, and you're going to pay for it. That's number one.
For companies that qualify for the flow-through shares,
you can deal with it on the basis of, and I noticed, from a practical point of view, you don't have to sell your IP. If you've been able to pay for it yourself and you're not desperate for money, you can license it. You don't have to sell it. Now, mind you, greed always takes over. Somebody writes you big enough check. I mean, there's certainly lots of proof for that.
Right.
Somebody gives you enough Bitcoin, you're going to put your name on it and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But the reality is that there's never going to be a guarantee that we can chain people to the oars. But we can certainly put in a situation where if you've used FTS, there's no free ride at the end.
Yeah.
If it stays in Canada, if it grows in Canada, if it goes public in Canada, great. But I mean, in my lifetime, our firm has done many transactions where the acquirers are all U.S.
You're asking great questions. They've all been asked and answered.
Sure.
Over in the UK during the last 30 years.
Yeah.
What's really interesting is that 50% of the unicorns.
50% of the unicorns.
50% of the unicorns in the UK made use of the EIS.
Oh, really?
SEIS.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the British government has already decided that it's far more effective to support programs like this than anything else they've ever done to create jobs. And these jobs end up being permanent. And the UK now leads Europe in terms of software development.
Interesting.
And one of the things you need to think about, though, too, is that so far, Canada's been quite successful with its early SR&ED program. They've been quite successful at incubating new technologies. They've been horrible at commercializing those technologies. So the point is, why invent something and have to have somebody else commercialize it? And that's one of the things. So style changes, as the nomenclature goes, has been used as a way to disqualify experimental development. And I'm going, but that's a fundamental to how you market.
Yeah.
Is you go to market and you find out what features are acceptable, what features aren't. And there's no reason why that shouldn't be considered part of the commercialization effort, start to finish. And the difficulty is everybody got fixated on the scientific research side. And truthfully, I mean, the reality is the universities love the scientific research.
Yeah.
It's pure science.
Yeah, it's their domain.
But the truth of the matter is the economy is almost indifferent to pure science. They're interested in commercially realizable science.
Yeah. And on the people side, if companies start to use FTS, they can raise more money faster in tech companies, which will allow them to hire not better scientists, but better sales and marketing people. And I don't think you'd disagree with me, Paul, that we really don't punch our weight in sales and marketing.
Absolutely.
And we will be able to go to the States. And now's the perfect time to do it. Go to the States and hire Americans. So rather than ship the technology up to America, let's
keep the head office in Canada.
Sales and marketing firepower.
I hate to think of the number of times I've seen companies that have a great product, but they don't have enough gas in the tank to get to market quickly enough for somebody not to catch up to them.
Yeah.
Which is hard tricky.
So FTS is the fuel, and leadership is what makes it happen.
Okay.
And we can now go. They'll be able to go to the States or anywhere else and hire the leaders they need to bring this tech to market, because they can't now. Every startup that I've ever seen, it doesn't matter where they are in the country, is, the last thing they spend money on is sales and marketing. And it should be the first thing they spend money on, because that's what the Americans do.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I remember early in my career when the president of American Airlines was a Canadian.
Okay.
The president of Esso was an American, or was a Canadian. The head of one of the major networks was a Canadian. Most of the comedians were Canadians. It's not like we can't do it. We just need the tools in the room.
Yeah. And it has been done in the UK before. Are there any other countries with this? But I guess it's
Australia. Australia's done it as well. They have their own form of FTS, and it's not quite as successful as the UK, but bloody close.
Yeah.
And if you even look at the program in BC, it's been very successful.
Interesting. Okay. So from my perspective here, so we've kind of gone through, we've looked at like, first of all, what the hell is this thing, right? Like how exactly does it work? We're looking at like the tax benefits are that you're getting the money up front, you're getting the deduction up front for money that you're probably going to lose anyway as as an investor. And then
Feel better.
just makes you feel better about it. Yeah. We've kind of talked about how it might actually be net from a tax perspective for the government, given the additional jobs that it does create, the economic activity. It creates more small businesses that are innovating and might have even become unicorns, similar to in the UK. And with the definition of SR&ED, it is pretty constrained. And I mean, we often don't like even working with those companies that do have those kind of claims. We work with SR&ED consultants, and then we get to make the claim, and then we get the call from CRA when they get audits.
Think of the cost that's embedded there.
Yeah, absolutely. There's an administrative cost that we prefer not to even deal with. So yeah, no, I agree with that. And I think, you're essentially claiming that the definition of eligible expenses should be broadened to make it easier and just less of an argument, which I agree with. I think with SR&ED, it's really complicated. It's like, is it claimable or not? It's a long story, and so then moving, the IP to the US. You're explaining that the truth is, like, we could put some restraints on when they do move, but we'd want to hopefully even just keep the royalties in Canada if we can. But so I think, to be honest, I think this kind of makes sense.
Sorry, if you take the grants that you used to get for doing research, some of the what the heck would they call? It's a grant structure that if you took a grant, then in the event of a sale, they had the ability to block it.
Who had the ability to block it? The government? Oh, really?
Yeah, the granting authority.
Oh, wow.
Again, we're not reinventing the wheel. What we're really doing is looking at, sort of a crash of a car, and we're taking the parts out and saying, but you can make a unicycle out of this. Yeah. As opposed to a transport truck.
And I think one of the key things you were talking about here is the political timing, right? Which I agree with. Like, at this point, I think Canadians do want to foster Canadians and want to invest in Canadian businesses and to create that economic activity in our own country instead of like it leaving, right? So I think this is one of those ways where we can have almost an unfair advantage for our startups in Canada. So I think that's pretty big. And you're kind of talking about, because I think one of the big arguments against this could be around like the whole, it helps the wealthy over kind of like the regular person. But I think it makes sense what you're saying is that, like, the truth is most people don't have a pension. And even if the pensions were to be involved, like, they're buying flow through shares too, right? So everyone's going to be involved in some way, and it's not
This really democratizes wealth creation, period.
Yeah.
It's not just for the wealthy.
Mm-hmm.
It democratizes wealth creation. That means you, me, and everybody else that we know that may not be spending $100,000 or $1 million a year have enough to put in an RSP or TSFA or whatever it's called. Yeah. This becomes another vehicle, and that starts to build.
Mm-hmm.
But Canadians do that.
So, and I think personally, I'd rather that my kids, your kids, had a job as something other than a barista, and have an opportunity to be owners in the own store.
Right.
Yeah. The problem with being a service-based country, because we're a service-based country.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with being a service-based country is you may wake up and the services are no longer needed.
Yeah, you can't even smell the coffee.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's gone.
Yeah.
So we create the stuff here. We create the innovation here. We keep it here.
And it does become, when you think about it, it does become an opportunity to integrate business and universities.
Right.
So knowledge development and knowledge creation and knowledge commercialization can become a troika. That you've got control over it, and everybody benefits, because, quite frankly, if I as an entrepreneur raise money and I need some improvements, I can go and get that university research done.
Yeah. And I think one valid point you briefly mentioned, but I think is worth mentioning again, is just the jobs that are being created are good jobs. Like they're not, like where it's not like when you look at the StatsCan reports and there's like 5,000 more jobs. No, these are like high tech. Partially, they might even have some equity in their tech company. Like these are high quality, high sought after jobs.
They're not hewers of wood and drawers of wood.
No. And on average, in Canada now, on average, the ICT jobs, tech jobs, pay 30% more.
Okay.
Aggregate.
Right.
30% more than all other jobs.
Yeah.
This is a win-win-win. I mean, at the end of the day, this is the most effective and most Canadian way to do this for our early stage capital, our companies. It has low cost, high return policy. It doesn't require any new bureaucracy. It engages private investors with public money instead of government money, and it keeps Canadian innovation in Canadian hands.
So I think what you guys are suggesting here really does make sense. I think, essentially you're creating good quality jobs in Canada. You're keeping it in Canada. We could put some restrictions on those companies kind of not leaving Canada in a way, and it does benefit all Canadians, not just the wealthy. I think it helps making sure that we're fostering more innovation, so it could create even more unicorns like it did in the UK. And so I think this is generally a good idea. I think this is good for Canadians, and I really do hope Carney puts this forward. So I wish you all the best on that.
Well, thank you very much. Because I think at the end of the day, what we're looking at, this is not, yes, there will be problems with it in terms of any program. There's always going to be bad actors. Okay.
Yeah.
But if we approach this like Eeyore, nothing's going to happen. And our situation will continue to erode because universities are under threat. I mean, you look at the whole question of immigration, students from outside, how universities have been using their budgets, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. You look at what's going on generally in the world around us, and we need to be focusing on creating new initiatives and self-reliant initiatives that can reflect the true character and adventurism of Canadians, because it's there. And I wouldn't ignore it for a moment.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of very hungry and innovative Canadians that they just need that pathway. We need to make it easier. We need to get the capital flowing and give that unfair advantage, I'll say, to the Canadian businesses to actually get them to grow. So that's really cool. Yeah. So how do people get in touch with you guys? Is it through LinkedIn or Twitter? If people want to kind of follow the story here? What
we need people to do is go to canflowthrough.com. That's the website we put up in 24 hours. Canflowthrough.com.
Okay. It'll be in the show notes.
And sign up.
Okay.
Look in and give us your opinion.
Okay.
You can either send us an email, or you can drop a note there, or you can record a video. We managed to get 48 people to endorse this in the space of about 72 hours when we needed it done. Now we'd like a couple of 100,000 people to do the same thing and educate themselves on the benefits of doing this. I mean,
well, or quite frankly, for somebody to say, here's what it would mean to me.
Some examples of how they would feel through it. Yeah.
People, and I'd also be really interested for people who unfortunately have managed to hit the wall at 100 miles an hour, saying, if that had been available when I was there, I could have done this.
Yeah. Those are the unfortunate stories that don't get the press.
But it's what we're really because the other thing too is we need to make this almost a cottage industry right across Canada because we do have the ability. We've got one of the best school systems in the world.
Yeah, very well educated.
And I'm saying, okay, you've built this, you've built the knowledge. Now give them the opportunity to use it.
Okay. Tech is the largest group of people in the country, 1.8 million. Tech has no national association. None. When John passed, that was it.
Yeah.
There is no association that represents Canadian technology firms.
Well, not the small ones for sure.
Well, the one that represents the big ones is American owned. So don't make me go into that. Yes.
Okay.
So
We only have limited time. We can't get through all the rants, but
average Canadians.
Yeah.
They go to canflowthrough.com.
Well, I think of it this way. We should be trying to encourage the opportunity for everybody to build another Shopify.
Yeah.
Beautifully put.
And people do want to do it.
And they do.
Let's let them do it.
Yeah.
So thank you both for coming in. Honestly, it was really good. I kind of drilled you guys hard on these kind of questions, and I think you came back with real solid responses. And I think, getting for most business owners to actually go through me to kind of actually understand what you're going through, what you're trying to do, the actual tax policies, I think helps most of our listeners here. So I will thank you both for coming in. Thank you. And I'm going to invite everybody to please see you next month on Small Business Big Insights. And I invite everybody to work hard, stay curious, and tune in.